My name is Sadie Ivers. I'm 29 years old, and one rainy Tuesday night last fall, my sister rang my doorbell for the first time in more than 2 years. The last time we stood that close, I was sliding a folder across our parents' kitchen table, the folder that ended her engagement, her reputation, and the version of our family I grew up inside. Because 3 years ago, my sister sat our family down and told us she was dying. She wasn't. What she was actually doing, to me, to my parents, to a church full of people who emptied their wallets for her, and what I finally did about it, is why my hand was shaking on that doorknob. And what I decided in that doorway, with the rain still dripping off her coat, is something I'm still turning over in my hands. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light, and quiet women stop being quiet. If you've ever been the one who holds the family together while somebody else gets all the worry, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. Because this story starts with the best news of my life, and it took exactly 3 weeks for my family to turn it into a waiting room. Let me take you back to the April everything started. I was 26, and I had spent 5 of those years as a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Albany, New York. It's good work if you like precision, and I love precision. I check things for a living. I find the missing signature, the date that doesn't line up, the claim that sounds right until you pull the file. Nights and weekends, I studied. I took the LSAT in a middle school gym that smelled like floor wax and other people's nerves. I applied to exactly one dream school, an Ivy League law school in Manhattan, because application fees are real money when you're paying your own rent. And in April, standing in the elevator of my apartment building, I opened the email. Admitted. With a scholarship covering half. I read it 4 times between the lobby and the 3rd floor, then once more with my back against my own door, and I made a sound I'd deny in a deposition. I printed the letter at work the next day and stuck it to my refrigerator with a little brass magnet shaped like the scales of justice. A gag gift from my boss. I stood there looking at it the way other people look at sonograms. Here is what you need to understand about me, though. My first thought, my very first, before the joy even finished landing, was how to announce this without causing trouble. I drafted the wording in my head like a settlement notice. In my family, good news has always needed a bodyguard. I just didn't know yet that this particular good news was about to get jumped in an alley by a diagnosis that didn't exist. To explain what happened next, you have to meet my family the way I met them, from the inside. My mother, Lynn, spent 30 years as an emergency room nurse. She's good. She's the person you want in the worst hour of your life. But you can't work triage for 30 years and leave it at the hospital, and our house ran on her rules whether she knew it or not. Whoever is bleeding worst gets seen first. My sister Brooke, 4 years older than me, figured that out young. She wasn't evil. She was a weather system. Fevers before field trips. A fainting spell at her own graduation party. The night before my college commencement, she went to the ER with chest pains. Panic, it turned out. And my family spent my commencement 200 miles away, beside an ER vending machine, while strangers heard my name read aloud. On my 25th birthday, she announced her engagement to Grant while I was inhaling to blow out the candles. I want to be fair. I never doubted her crises felt real to her. That's what made them unbeatable. And me? I became the other thing a triage house produces. The easy one. The one who needs nothing. I moved out at 18. Paid my own way. Called every Sunday. Arrived with salad and left before the dishes could become a conversation. I had seen the pattern my whole life. I'm a professional pattern seer. And my solution was to stay small, stay solvent, and stay slightly out of range. It worked, more or less, for years. The flaw in my system was simple. I had never once brought home anything big enough to be worth taking. And then, that April, for the first time in my life, I did. I announced it at Sunday dinner, between the roast and the coffee, in the exact casual tone I had rehearsed. Law school, the city, scholarship, starting in the fall. And for about 15 minutes, it was wonderful. My father, Tom, a print shop machinist who treats words like overtime, got up and hugged me with ink-stained hands and said, First lawyer in the family. Twice, like he was testing how it sounded. My mother cried a little and asked practical nurse questions. Housing, health insurance, how far from a hospital? 15 minutes. I know the length because I've replayed that dinner so many times, and the turn always comes at the same spot. My mother squeezed my hand across the table, smiled, and said, "You always land on your feet." She meant it as praise. I filed it as praise for years. It would take me another year to hear that sentence for what it actually was. A license. The paperwork you sign when you've decided somebody doesn't need catching, so your hands are free for somebody who does. And across the table, my sister Brooke was quiet. Genuinely, unusually quiet. She'd said congratulations at the right moment, hugged me at the right angle, and then sat for the rest of dinner with both hands wrapped around her water glass like she was trying to keep warm in a heated house, watching the attention move around the table like it was a plate she hadn't been served. I noticed. I notice everything. It's my one marketable skill. I told myself she and Grant had probably argued in the car. 3 weeks later, she called a family meeting of her own. She sat us down on a Sunday, in the living room instead of the kitchen, which in our family is the difference between a conversation and an address to the nation. Grant stood behind her chair with his hands on her shoulders, and Brooke, 30 years old, looked around at us and said she had stage 4 lymphoma. 6 months to 2 years, she said. She said it with her chin up, brave, dry-eyed until exactly the moment my mother reached her. And then the two of them folded together on the carpet while my father stood in the middle of his own living room, turning his reading glasses over and over in his hands. I sat frozen, and inside the freeze, grief and something else were fighting, and I hated myself for the something else. Because even in that first hour, small things snagged on me the way a bad affidavit snags. She named her treatment plan a little too smoothly, the way people in movies name drugs. The syllables polished. No stumble. No reaching. She had answers before questions. The story had no loose threads, and I process paperwork for a living. Real files always have loose threads. I strangled every one of those thoughts in the crib. What kind of person audits her dying sister? By nightfall, my mother had a legal pad out and was building what she builds best, a care plan, and I watched my own name get written into it before anyone asked me a question. Sadie. Wednesdays. Sadie. Appointments. Sadie's schedule is flexible. She hasn't started school yet. That last line was said out loud, in front of me, in the tone you use for settled things. I did try. I need you to know how much I tried to do this right. I asked to come to an appointment, just to sit in the waiting room, just to hold her coat. I need one thing that's only mine, Brooke said, eyes full. And what monster argues with that? I asked for her oncologist's name so Mom could coordinate records. He's at a private center in Latham. I'll text it to you. The text never came, and asking twice felt like an accusation. I offered to handle her insurance paperwork. I do this professionally. It would have taken me a weekend. The social work team handles all of it, Sadie. Please stop trying to manage my cancer. Every door I knocked on closed with perfect medical manners, in vocabulary she'd grown up hearing across our dinner table. You cannot subpoena your own sister, and thanks to privacy law, you cannot even phone a hospital and ask whether she's a patient. Those walls exist for good reasons. They just also work fine for other purposes. So I did the only thing left. I called my law school's admissions office and asked about deferral. 1 year, they said. Granted for documented family emergencies, 1 time only. The school does not defer twice. After that, you reapply from zero. Scholarship gone. I remember the admissions officer's voice, kind and final, like a nurse's. I signed the form at my kitchen table, under the acceptance letter on my refrigerator, and my brass scales of justice magnet held the letter flat, while I postponed my life by 1 year for a disease I would spend that whole year failing to find. The year found its rhythm fast. Wednesdays were mine. I'd pick Brooke up at 9, drive her 40 minutes to the medical plaza, and drop her at the main entrance because she was firm about that part. Don't park. Don't wait. Infusions run 4-5 hours and I don't want you watching me come out weak. It sounded like dignity. It scanned as dignity. Her head was already shaved by then. She'd done it herself, preemptively, the week after the announcement, before a single treatment. "I want to beat it to the punch," she said, and everyone cried, and I have to hand it to her, even now. It was the single most convincing thing she ever did. You look at a shaved head and your body believes before your brain gets a vote. Her church started a fund. $17,400, raised in under 2 months. Bake sales, a spaghetti night, a widower who gave up his fishing boat deposit. Casseroles stacked up in my parents' freezer in labeled layers like sediment. My mother cut back her hours. My father started saying even fewer words. And I drove, every Wednesday, and watched my sister walk through those sliding doors with her chin up, and some weeks I sat in the visitor lot anyway, against instructions, telling myself I stayed to be nearby, knowing I stayed because something in me was keeping watch. I'd like to claim it was love. It was partly love. But I check things for a living, and some checking runs below the will, like a pilot light. All that autumn it burned low and blue in me, and I fed it nothing, and it would not go out. The first crack was made of paper, because in my life everything important is. A Wednesday in late October. I'd dropped her at the main entrance, then parked anyway, and gone in the side door to the lobby cafe, because it was raining and I wanted coffee, and I make no apologies. I nursed that coffee and read case summaries, and I lost track of time until my phone buzzed. "Brooke. Done early today, easy session. Where are you?" 22 minutes. That's what the parking machine printed on my ticket when it spat it back. 22 minutes, gate to gate, for an infusion she had told us runs 4 to 5 hours. In the car she was bright, chatty, scarf knotted where hair used to be, and she narrated her easy session with detail. Which nurse, which chair, the juice they hand out. And I drove and nodded, and felt the details land wrong, one by one, like checks drawn on an account I suddenly needed to see. Easy sessions exist. Schedules change. Maybe blood work only, maybe a consult. I gave her every out a good clerk gives a document before flagging it. But that night, alone in my apartment, I did the thing I can't take back. I flattened that parking receipt on my kitchen counter and I put it in a folder. If you've ever prayed you were wrong about someone you love and kept the receipt anyway, tell me in the comments, because I need to know I'm not the only one who's lived in that exact split. At work, I open a file when I believe a claim deserves testing. I open this one praying I would get to close it. The folder had other plans. 2 weeks later, during what the family calendar called her heavy chemo week, I stopped by Brooke and Grant's place with a container of congee, because that was the only food she'd told us she could hold down. Grant's car was gone. Through the front window, before I ever knocked, I saw my dying sister at the kitchen island, laughing into her phone, working her way through a takeout container of drunken noodles, the kind she always ordered extra hot, the kind that once made Grant cry at a food court. Her scarf was off. Her scalp shone under the pendant light, freshly maintained. I stood on the walk with my warm little container and watched her be completely, radiantly fine, and then I knocked. And by the time the door opened, the noodles were gone and the scarf was on and her voice had dropped into the register the whole family now recognized as brave. "You're an angel. I probably can't keep anything down, but the thought." "Light day," she said. "The new anti-nausea meds," she said. There was an answer for everything. There always was. The file at work with an answer for everything is the file I pull first. I drove home, sat at my counter, and added a line to the folder in my clean paralegal print. Date, time, what I saw, no adjectives. Then I closed it and put my hand flat on the cover like you'd quiet a heartbeat. Some files, once you open them, start keeping you. In January, the money moved. My parents had a fund, $12,000, saved slow over a decade, ink money and overtime money, that they'd promised me for first-year living costs in the city. My mother told me about the change the way you'd mention a schedule shift over the phone while unloading her dishwasher. I could hear the plates. "We're putting it toward Brooke's supplemental care. There's a healing retreat in Sedona her support group swears by." Integrative. The insurance won't touch it, of course. You understand. And then, into my silence, the sentence again, warm as a heating pad. You'll land on your feet, honey. You always do. I stood in my kitchen listening to the plates clink into their rack, and for the first time in my life I heard that sentence with the wrapping off. It wasn't a compliment. It was an invoice marked paid in advance. I was the daughter whose feet were the family's insurance policy, and Brooke was the daughter whose falls the family existed to catch. And a healing retreat in the red rocks of Arizona was about to eat my first year's rent on the strength of a diagnosis I could not verify from a doctor I could not name. I said something agreeable and small, because 40 years of training doesn't dissolve in one phone call. Then I hung up, took out the folder, and turned over a fresh page. Here's what I knew by then, in my bones, if not yet in evidence. Grief spends money forward, but fraud spends it sideways, into things with spa robes. And here's what I did not yet have the nerve to write down, even in my clean paralegal print. My mother had mentioned, approvingly, proof of her daughter's fighting spirit, that Brooke saved money by booking the non-refundable tier. Dying people, I have since learned, rarely gamble on their own attendance. She never missed a payment or a pedicure. I want to be precise about what I did next, because how you find a truth matters as much as the truth. I did not hack anything. I did not steal a file or record a phone call. I did what I do at my desk every day of my working life. I read what's public, slowly, twice. The church fund had a page, and the page had updates, and the updates had photos. Fight day. One caption read, "There sat my sister in a recliner, scarf, brave thumbs up, an IV line taped to her arm." I had looked at that photo a dozen times on my phone like everyone else in the county. That night, I looked at it on my laptop, full screen, the way I look at exhibits. And the taped line stopped at the tape. No catheter under it, no hub, no port. Just tubing laid against skin, going nowhere, dressed in medical tape like a costume wearing a costume. Zoom out. On her wrist, a hospital band. Zoom in. The band's print. Half legible and legible enough. An admission date from years back. The night of the chest pains. The eve of my commencement. She'd kept it. She'd kept it. And worn it as a prop. And the prop was load-bearing for $17,000 of other people's grocery money. I sat back from my laptop, and the room was very quiet, the way rooms go quiet after verdicts. There's a thing that happens in my chest when a file confesses. A cold click, like a lock deciding. I'd felt it 100 times at work, and it always felt like winning. This time, it felt like watching a door close on a house I grew up in. I printed both photos, marked them the way I mark exhibits, and put them behind the receipts. The folder was becoming a case, and cases, in my experience, do not stay in trunks. The following Wednesday, I did the thing I'd been refusing to do for months. I dropped her at the main entrance, watched her walk in with her chin up, and then, instead of driving home, I pulled around into the visitor lot and waited with my eyes on the side exit, hating myself in a calm, organized way. 25 minutes. That's how long my sister spent inside a cancer center on an infusion Wednesday. At minute 25, she came out the side door in sunglasses, scarf off, moving like a woman between errands, and got into Grant's gray sedan, which had been idling at the curb the whole time, and they pulled away laughing at something. I did not follow them. I did not take a picture. It would have proven nothing anyway. A woman may leave a building. I sat in my parked car with my hands at 10 and 2 like I was still driving somewhere, and I understood, finally and completely, that there had never been a Wednesday. The chair, the nurse, the little cups of juice. She had built a set, furnished it weekly with detail, and cast me as the driver. For 13 months I had been the transportation department of a play. And Grant. I want to be careful here, because Grant turned out to be a casualty too, a man who thought he was ferrying his fiancée from lymphoma to lunch. Grant was simply another audience member with a better seat. I drove home under the speed limit the whole way, which for me is a 5-alarm symptom. At my counter, I wrote the date and 2 lines, no adjectives, and closed the folder. Then I opened it again and counted what I had. 9 parking stamps, 2 photographs, 1 worn hospital band, 0 doctors. What I still didn't have was the piece that couldn't be explained away by a tired woman with a private streak. I needed a name. Before I tell you how I got the name, I have to tell you about the summer of the broken femur, because it's the only way any of this makes the kind of sense that keeps you human. My father told it to me that February, on the back porch. Both of us in coats. Him holding a beer he wasn't drinking. Brooke was 12. She went off the rope swing at the quarry pond sideways and hit the shallow shelf, and the break was bad. Surgery, pins, a cast from hip to ankle, a full summer flat on her back. And my mother, who had never in living memory taken more than 3 consecutive days off, took the entire summer. Unpaid. She set up a cot in Brooke's room. She made popsicles from juice and read her the whole Little House series and charted her pain like a patient she was allowed to love out loud. I was 8. I spent that summer at my grandmother's, and I remember it as the summer I learned to make my own sandwiches, and I remember being proud of that. Proud. You see it, don't you? My father looked out at the yard and said the part he'd carried for 20 years. The day the cast came off, your sister cried like somebody died, Sadie. I thought it was the pain. It took me a long time to figure out she was crying because summer was over. 2 little girls, 1 house, 1 exhausted woman doing triage at work, and then coming home and doing it again for free. Brooke learned that broken gets you loved. I learned that whole gets you left alone. And I called being left alone independence, and I built a life out of it. Neither of us ever once got looked at for no reason. I'm not excusing what my sister did. I'm telling you where the disease actually started, because it was never in her lymph nodes. By March, the folder was complete except for 1 tab, and it had outgrown my kitchen drawer. Or maybe I'd just stopped being able to eat breakfast next to it. It was an accordion folder now, the maroon kind we use for closed cases. Receipts in date order, photos sleeved, my notes typed. I labeled the empty tab physician, and it sat there like a missing tooth. And then I did something I have never told anyone until now. I put the folder in the trunk of my car, under the spare tire, and I drove around with it there for 11 days. To work, to Sunday dinner, to the pharmacy. 11 days of merging onto I-90 with a live grenade under my spare tire, checking my mirrors like the truth might be following me. I couldn't bring it inside my parents' house, and I couldn't bring it back inside my apartment. So it lived in the one space I owned that no one ever asked about. And I want you to understand what those 11 days were. They were me giving my sister 11 more chances to be dying. Meanwhile, the clock I'd tried to ignore started chiming. June 1st, my enrollment confirmation deadline, the 1-year deferral's hard edge, was 10 weeks out, and my mother had begun saying things like, "Obviously fall is impossible," in the same settled tone as the care plan. Another year, she meant. Except there was no another year. There was only forfeit and reapply, scholarship gone, and when I explained that, the actual rule, the printed policy, my mother looked at me the way you look at someone doing math at a funeral, and Brooke, from the couch, said gently, "It's okay, Mom. Sadie's dreams have always been portable." I drove home that night with the folder humming under the spare tire like a second engine. 10 weeks, 1 empty tab, and a sister who had just, very softly, called my whole life a suitcase. The wedding got moved up that spring. Because time isn't guaranteed, Brooke told the family, and the family wept and nodded. And the church added a second fundraiser dinner to the calendar to help the young couple marry before the Lord called her home. I know how that sentence sounds. People believed it because believing it made them decent, and con artists eat decency for fuel. That part is not the church's fault. Brooke asked me to be her maid of honor in front of everyone, which is the only way she ever asked me for anything, and so one Saturday, I stood in a bridal shop holding fabric swatches while my dying sister tried on gowns and glowed. And in the fitting room mirror, flushed with the attention of 3 shop attendants who had been quietly told her story, she said the thing I think about most. She was looking at herself, not me. "You have your whole future, Sadie. All I have is this year, the year everybody finally sees me. She said it lightly, like a joke about the champagne. The fitting room went 1 second too quiet, the way a courtroom does when a witness answers the question nobody asked. Then an attendant laughed kindly, and the moment closed over like water. But I'd heard it. Not a confession. She was too fluent for that. More like the accounting behind the whole production, glimpsed for a blink through an open ledger. This year, everybody finally sees me. Not. This year, I'm sick. Not. This year, I'm dying. Scene. That was the product she'd been buying with all of it. The shaved head, the taped tubing, the juice cups. Scene. At market rate. With my year as the currency. I zipped her into the next gown, and my hands were perfectly steady, and that's when I knew the folder was coming out from under the spare tire. I tried my father first because he was the closest thing the family had to neutral ground. Porch again, coats again. I didn't show him the folder. I led with one gentle fact, the way you test a witness. Dad. She's never once given anyone the doctor's name. A whole year. Doesn't that seem strange to you? And my father, who I had watched shrink an inch that year, did not look surprised. And that was the terrible part. He looked out at the yard he's mowed for 30 years, and his jaw worked. And what he finally said, very quietly, was this. Don't make your mother choose, Sadie, I'm asking you. Please, because she won't pick you. There it is. The sentence that still lives somewhere under my ribs. Not she'd never believe it. Not you're wrong. My father had run the numbers long before I had, maybe years before, and had chosen the only survival he understood, which was to keep the household weather calm and love us both from inside his silence. The one person in that family who suspected what I suspected was begging me to help him keep not knowing it. I looked at him and understood that if I put the folder on the table, I'd be doing it without a single ally in the room, and my mother's first instinct would not be to read it. It would be to find out who had hurt her bleeding daughter, and it would be me. Have you ever been told, in words or in a look, to swallow a truth to keep a family running? Put it in the comments, because I need to hear how it went for you. That night I understood the true cost sheet. Telling would cost me my mother, and not telling had a price too. It was just being billed, quietly, to a church full of people, and to a version of me I was starting not to recognize. What ended the swallowing was arithmetic, not anger. The second fundraiser had a printed goal, 10,000 more, for experimental options out of state. And I sat in a pew that Sunday watching Pastor Dale hold up my sister's photograph, and I did the sum I'd been refusing to do. 17,400 already given, 10,000 solicited. My parents' 12. My scholarship year. Unpriceable. And every dollar of it raised on a diagnosis whose only supporting document was a shaved head. I work in a law office. I don't practice law, but I've prepared enough files to know the words that get typed onto cases like this one. Charitable fraud, obtaining property by false pretenses, words with sentencing ranges. And here is the thing that finally moved me, and I'll be honest that it wasn't the purest thing. I realized my silence had a legal texture now. I wasn't a sad sister with a hunch anymore. I was a person with an accordion folder of evidence watching new donations roll in. There's a word for people who know and say nothing while the plate gets passed, and I had typed that word into enough documents to feel it looking back at me. But it wasn't only that, and I won't pretend it was. That Sunday, an usher's wife I've known since childhood pressed a folded 20 into the collection basket and then squeezed my hand and said, "Your family is so strong." And I smiled at her, this good woman giving up $20 she needed, and I felt the smile happen on my face like something worn over the skin. And I understood, with a clarity that frightened me, that I was in the play now too. I had a costume. I had lines. The only difference between my performance and Brooke's was that mine was still legal. 10 weeks had become 6. I needed the name, and I finally knew how I'd get it. I got the name by being family, which is its own kind of confession. Sunday dinner, dessert, everyone soft with pie, and I asked it as logistics, not challenge. For the retreat forms, Who should mom list as your primary oncologist, just in case? No edge. Clipboard voice. And Brooke, deep in the ease of 13 unquestioned months, answered on autopilot, reaching for her coffee. Dr. Corwin, at the Latham Center. Tossed off like pocket change. My mother wrote the name on her legal pad, grateful for something to write, and the dinner rolled on, and I sat with my pie and my racing heart, because I knew something the rest of the table didn't. Physician licenses are public records. Every state runs a lookup. Anyone can check. Almost no one ever does. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter and typed the name into New York's physician database. No results. I widened to every spelling. Corwin, Corwin, Corwin. I widened to every specialty, every county, then every bordering state. There is no oncologist named Corwin within 100 miles of Albany. There is, as far as any public record shows, no Dr. Corwin at all. I printed the empty search screen at 1 in the morning. No results found, the saddest exhibit I've ever sleeved, and I sat in my kitchen while 14 months finished rearranging themselves into their true shape. Then I did the last decent thing I could think of. I drove to her house the next evening while Grant was at work, put one parking stamp on her kitchen counter, just one, and said, 48 hours. You tell Mom and Dad the truth. Whatever the truth is. Or I show them what I have. My sister looked at the little paper rectangle, and I watched the whole performance drain out of her face like water finding a crack, and for 5 seconds I met the person underneath. Dry-eyed, level, almost bored. Sick beats smart in this house, she said. It always has. Then the mask slid back up and she asked if I wanted tea. She didn't use the 48 hours to confess. She used them to reload. Hour 40, a Tuesday evening, my phone lit up with the family group chat. Brooke has news. Everyone at Mom and Dad's at 7. I drove over with the folder in my trunk and my heart going like a filing clerk at deadline, because I already knew. You learn a person's moves when you've spent a year cataloging them. We assembled in the living room, the address to the nation room, Grant behind her chair, my mother already reaching for her hand, and my sister looked around at her audience and told them the cancer had spread to her brain. There were sounds in that room I will hear for the rest of my life. My mother made one of them. And through it all, Brooke's eyes found mine, just once, for less than a second, and there was nothing in them that matched her voice. And I understood the message because it was addressed to me alone. Your move was never going to matter. Escalation as armor. A brain lesion to make any accusation unspeakable, because who interrogates a woman with tumors in her head, and if her details wobbled now, well, that's the lesions talking. It was, and I say this with the specific horror of a professional admiring and opposing filing, airtight. The benefit dinner got moved up. A cousin started a prayer chain. My mother began researching out-of-state trials on her phone before the meeting even broke up. I hugged my sister goodbye at the door like everyone else, and her scarf smelled like our childhood shampoo, and she whispered thank you for coming against my ear. 48 hours, I had given her. She'd spent them building a fortress out of my family's love. Thursday night, I called my parents and asked for the two of them and Brooke, no Grant, at the kitchen table. Not the living room, the kitchen, where facts have always lived in our house, between the bills and the salt. I put the accordion folder on the table and I laid it out the way I've watched attorneys do it for years, no speech, one exhibit at a time. 9 parking stamps in date order, gate to gate, none longer than 40 minutes, for 13 months of 4-hour infusions. The fundraiser photo, full page, with the taped tubing that connects to nothing. The wristband, enlarged, with its admission date from 3 years ago. And last, the printout, New York State Physician Lookup. All spellings, all specialties, all bordering states. No results found. My mother fought it exactly the way you'd expect a good nurse to fight it. She went technical. Parking validation errors. Photos compress badly. Private centers bill differently. Lookup databases lag. She stood at her own kitchen counter cross-examining paper because paper can be wrong and daughters can't be, and my father sat with his hand flat over the parking stamps, not moving, like he was keeping them warm. and I asked the only question I had rehearsed. Not to my mother, to Brooke, who had gone very still. What are you taking? Name one drug. Not the protocol. I know you know the protocol. One pill from your own kitchen. One bottle I can hold. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car went by with its radio on. My mother turned to her oldest daughter to receive the answer that would put me in my place, and my sister looked at the bottle-less kitchen of her 31 years and began, very quietly, to come apart. It did not come apart the way it does in movies, one clean confession with music. It came apart in strips. First anger. How dare I? This is what I've always done. Jealous, jealous, jealous. Then bargaining. The doctor was real, but a private. The treatments were real but holistic. The money was mostly still there. Then, when each strip hit the table and died next to the exhibits, quieter and quieter, until what was left standing in my parents' kitchen was not the dying swan and not the golden bride, but a 31-year-old woman shaking in a way no audience had ever been meant to see. And she said the only fully true sentence I'd heard from her in 14 months. At least when I'm sick, Mom looks at me. I watched those words hit my mother like weather hitting glass, and then I watched my mother do the thing I had known, since the porch, that she would do. She crossed the kitchen and she wrapped her arms around Brooke, around the liar, the fraud, the architect of all of it. And she held her daughters shaking with 30 years of trained hands, and over Brooke's shoulder her eyes found me, standing by my folder, my beautiful, accurate, worthless folder. "What did you do?" she said. Not to Brooke. To me. I want to tell you I said something equal to the moment. What I actually did was gather my exhibits, square their edges the way I do when my hands need instructions, and say, very quietly, the sentence I'd been carrying my whole life, without knowing it. I land on my feet, Mom, because nobody in this family has ever once tried to catch me. Then I walked out of the warm kitchen into the cold car and drove back to my apartment, and the collapse began without me. Here's what 14 months of performance costs when the curtain rips. Itemized. Because I think an itemized. That same night, Brooke went into crisis. A real one, the first real one. And I will not put the details on the internet except to say my mother recognized the danger with a nurse's eyes and drove her to the ER. And this time, the hospital band had the right date on it. She was evaluated, kept safe, and within the week, she entered a residential program. Voluntarily, 90 days. A doctor whose name I will actually print, Dr. Feld, eventually gave the thing its clinical name, factitious disorder, with a depression underneath it that had been running the projector for years. Grant learned everything on a Thursday and was gone by Sunday. The ring came back to my parents by registered mail, which is the most Grant sentence I can construct. The church was told the truth by my father. I didn't know he had it in him, and I don't think he did either. And Pastor Dale stood in a closed-door meeting while my parents promised repayment of all $17,400, which they raised by borrowing against the house they've owned for 30 years. No charges were filed. Mercy, partly. Repayment, mostly. Small towns bury their embarrassments deeper than their dead. And me, the person who had said the true thing with receipts. I became, in the family phone tree's official history, the night everything happened. Not the lie, the telling. My mother didn't speak to me for 11 days, and when she finally did, it was one sentence on my voicemail, tired as a night shift. "You did it in one evening, Sadie. I have to fix it for years." I enrolled on time. Deposit paid on May 30th, 2 days inside the deadline, from my phone, in the parking lot of a grocery store, because that's where I was when I finally stopped waiting for anyone's permission. In August, I packed my apartment into a rental van nobody helped me load, put the acceptance letter and its brass magnet in the cup holder, and drove 2.5 hours south to Manhattan with the radio off. I had won. I need you to sit with how completely I had won. The seat, the scholarship, the truth on the record. The fraud stopped, the donors being repaid. Every count, my verdict. And I have never in my life felt anything as quiet as that first semester. I studied in the library until it closed because my studio apartment had exactly one chair, and some nights, walking home past lit restaurant windows, I'd catch myself rehearsing, not case law, the kitchen table. Refining what I'd said, adding what I should have. Objection sustained again and again, in the courtroom behind my eyes where the trial never adjourned. That's the part nobody warns you about when they hand you the truth and tell you it will set you free. Being right is a meal that doesn't keep you full. The cards that came that first Christmas were signed Mom and Dad in my father's handwriting. My father called every month, on his lunch break, from the print shop parking lot. I could hear the presses, and we talked about my classes and his tomatoes, and never once about the thing. And I understood the calls were made from the driveway of his marriage, and I loved him for making them, and I let that be enough because it had to be. Brooke wrote to me once, about a year in. By then she was out of the residential program and into the long, unglamorous outpatient stretch. Tuesdays, my father reported, every single week. The envelope came to my apartment in handwriting I'd know anywhere, and I did not open it. I told myself I would when I was ready, and then I moved it from the counter to a drawer to a box, the way you move a thing you can neither keep nor bury. It rode to my second apartment in that box. And on moving day at the end of my second year, the box tipped, and the envelope slid out onto the empty floor of my new place and lay there in the light, like it had chosen its moment. I sat down on a milk crate and opened it. It was not what I'd braced for. No excuses, no relitigating, no asking to meet. It was an accounting. She had learned to itemize too, somewhere in all those Tuesdays. What she took from me, named plainly, the year, the 12,000, the wedding I'd have had a sister at, the mother I walked out of that kitchen without. What she took from the church, repaid now down to the widower's boat deposit she wrote, by our parents, a debt she was working off in installments from a job at a garden nursery, of all places. And then one line, alone on its own page, no punctuation softening it. Nobody ever looked at me until something was killing me. So I made the something up. And then, it almost was. I read that line until the light changed. I didn't write back. But I kept the letter, and for the first time in 2 years, I knew exactly where it was. Which brings us back to that Tuesday night last fall, 9:40, rain on the windows, me at my little desk outlining for a seminar. Third year, 7 months from a diploma with my name on it. The buzzer rang. Not the lobby buzzer, my actual door. Which means a neighbor let somebody in. Which means somebody stood on the sidewalk in the rain working up the nerve to press a stranger's button first. I looked through the peephole and my whole bloodstream changed direction. Brooke. Hair grown back past her ears, dark at the roots, real. No makeup. A raincoat gone through at the shoulders and under her arm, held the way you hold something you've rehearsed holding, a familiar maroon shape I couldn't make sense of for a second. And then could. She'd brought something to give me. She stood there not knocking, and I stood on my side not opening. 2 sisters separated by 1.5 inches of door, and 2 years of silence. And I did the thing I do. I inventoried. Tuesdays, my father's reports, the nursery job she'd held longer than any job in her life, the installments, the letter in my drawer. Then she knocked. Twice. Soft. And I heard her breathe in. And through the door, not knowing if I was even home, my sister said, "Sadie, it's me. I'm not here to ask you to forget anything. I came to ask if you think we can ever be sisters again. That's the whole question. You can just say no through the door." My hand was on the knob, and every version of me I had ever been. The easy one, the driver, the clerk, the plaintiff, put their hands on it too. I opened the door, not wide, the width of a conversation, my hand still on the frame. The hallway light in my building is the color of weak tea, and my sister stood in it looking older than 33 and more like herself than I'd ever seen her, if that makes sense. Like a photograph finally developed correctly. Up close I could see the rain hadn't spared the folder under her arm, and she noticed me noticing and held it a little tighter, and neither of us said anything about it yet. "Hi," she said. Hi, I said. Groundbreaking stuff. We come from a long line of people who narrate everything except what matters. Then she squared up, the way you do at a podium, and said her piece. And I could tell it was rehearsed, and I could tell the rehearsal kept collapsing on her, which is how I knew it was real. Rehearsed real has a stutter that performed. Real never has. I'd spent 13 months learning the difference at 40 miles an hour every Wednesday. I'm 2.5 years into treatment, she said. Tuesdays. I work at a nursery. Plants, not babies. I pay mom and dad back on the first of every month. I'm not fixed. Dr. Feld says fixed isn't the word, and I've stopped shopping for a better one. I didn't come to ask you to forget, and I didn't come to perform being well. Her chin did something complicated. I came because there's a version of the rest of our lives where you and I are just two women who share a mother and a Christmas card list. And before I let that be the answer, I had to stand here and ask you out loud. Do you think we can ever be sisters again? The rain ticked against the hallway window. Somewhere below, a neighbor's TV laughed at something. And in my head, quietly, a document I knew by heart began to recite itself. You should know that I had a speech. I'd been drafting it for 2 years without admitting that's what the drafting was. On library walks, in the shower, at red lights. My closing argument. It had sections. The year I lost, itemized. The mother I lost, exhibit by exhibit. The moment in the bridal shop, the side door, the juice cups, the 22 minutes. It was airtight and unanswerable, and standing in my doorway with my sister's question hanging in the tea-colored light, I felt it queue up in my chest like a career's worth of work finally called to trial. And then I looked at her hands. She was holding that ruined maroon folder the way a 12-year-old holds a cast, like the thing that hurt her was also somehow the only proof she'd ever mattered. And the first line of my closing argument dissolved on my tongue because I suddenly saw the whole courtroom for what it was. 2 years I had lived inside that trial. 2 years of being the wronged one, the right one, the one with the receipts. And it had kept me exactly as seen, exactly as fed, as Brooke's waiting rooms had ever kept her. Different currency, same starving economy. She bought attention with wounds. I bought worth with grievance. We were both still our mother's daughters, billing the world for love in the only denominations we'd been issued. So instead of the speech, I asked my 2 questions, the only due diligence that still mattered. Are you still in treatment? Every Tuesday, she said. 2.5 years, no gaps. Who knows you're here tonight? And my sister, who had never in her life done anything without an audience, who got engaged at my birthday and diagnosed herself into a congregation, looked at me in a dim hallway with rain in her hair and said, "Nobody. This one couldn't have witnesses." That was sort of the point. And that answer, more than any apology, is what moved my hand off the doorframe. "Wait here," I said, which are apparently the words I say at the exact moment my old life ends. I went to my closet, and from the bottom of a box I hadn't unpacked in 2 apartments, I took out my own maroon accordion folder. The one from the kitchen table, 9 parking stamps and 2 photographs and a printout that says, "No results found." And I carried it back to the door, and I watched my sister recognize it and go white. She thought I was about to read the charges. Honestly, some old prosecutor in me thought so too. Instead, I held it out to her, flat, on 2 hands, the way you return something to its owner. "Trade," I said. She didn't move. "Sadie. You asked if we can ever be sisters again," I said, and my voice came out level, the register I'd waited 2 years to hear from myself. "The answer is no. Not the way you mean it. The sisters we were died at that kitchen table. And Brooke? They should have. One of them was performing sick, and the other one was performing fine, and neither of us had told the truth at that dinner table since we were kids." Her chin came up. She didn't argue. "So here's what I can offer instead. First Saturday of every month, there's a coffee shop on my corner. 1 hour. Public table. And one rule. Only one. We tell the truth. Small truths count. Bad truths count double. The first time either of us performs anything, we're done. And I mean forever done. That's the whole offer. It isn't sisters again. It's sisters from scratch. She was crying now. The unphotogenic kind. The kind with no cameras in it. And this is yours to carry now, I said, and put my folder in her free hand. I've had it memorized for 2 years. The year, the money, the church, the lie. I could recite it in my sleep. And Brooke, that's the problem. I have been. You called it back then. Sick beats smart in this house. Maybe it always did. But I've learned something they don't teach at that kitchen table. Truth beats sick. It's the only thing that ever has. Somebody just has to be willing to go first, and I'm going first. I'm done being the clerk of your record. Carry your own file. Or burn it in a garden nursery, I honestly don't care. It's off my shelf. And my sister took the folder, took the whole weight of her own history onto her own arm, next to the one she'd brought. And then she held out the folder she'd carried through the rain, and I took that one, not knowing yet what was in it, and we stood there in the tea-colored light having traded evidence like two nations exchanging prisoners. She put out her hand. I want you to understand. In 29 years, my sister and I had hugged for cameras and cried for audiences, but we had never once shaken hands. We shook hands. Her grip was terrible and shaking and real. First Saturday, she said. First Saturday, I said. And I closed the door. Softly. All the way. And stood with my palm flat against it, listening to my sister's footsteps go down the stairs lighter than they'd come up. I sat on my one good chair and opened what my sister had carried through the rain. Inside, a repayment ledger, handwritten, every installment to our parents dated and initialed, months of them, the running balance shrinking line by line in her round schoolgirl numbers. A letter from Dr. Feld's program. Not private records, just the certificate of completion. The kind of thing you'd frame if your life had gone differently. A photograph I'd never seen. The two of us, maybe 6 and 10, in our grandmother's yard, me on her back, both of us mid-laugh, before either of us had learned our lessons. And at the bottom, in an envelope with my name on it, $1,200 in money orders and one line in her handwriting. First installment of your $12,000. It will take me a while. That's rather the point. I sat there a long time with the rain going and my hand over my mouth. Then I cried. The short, violent, efficient kind, the kind that's mostly release valve. And when it passed, I realized what had actually left my body. It wasn't Brooke. It was the case. 2 years of carrying the prosecution everywhere I went, and the whole thing had walked down my stairs under someone else's arm, where it should have been all along. I texted my father one line before bed. She came by. I'm okay. Call you tomorrow. And for the first time in 2 years, okay wasn't testimony. It was just the truth. Small and bad-free, and mine. It's been 6 months of First Saturdays now, so you should have the accounting. The first coffee lasted 40 minutes, and I'd estimate 31 of them were silence. But it was working silence, the kind two people do side by side, not the kind they aim at each other. By the third Saturday, she told me what the residential program was actually like, plainly, no set dressing, and I told her what the law library at 2 in the morning is actually like, and we discovered we'd both spent those years hiding in institutions with good lighting. In March, she texted me on a Friday night, "Can't make tomorrow, migraine," and Saturday morning, before I'd even answered, a second text arrived. That was a lie. No migraine. I'm scared of this month's conversation. That's the bad truth. Rule's the rule. Your call. I sat with my phone for a while, and then I wrote back the sentence that I think might be the actual hinge of this whole story. More than the folder, more than the door. A confessed lie counts as a truth. That's how the math works now. See you next month. And she was there next month. First table by the window. My mother and I are slower. She came down to the city in April and we had lunch, and she talked about the therapist she and my father still see. My father's idea. The bravest sentence of his life. And in the car afterward, looking straight through the windshield, she said, "I should have pulled the records myself. I'm a nurse. I know how to read a chart. I just didn't want to. That's all she said. It isn't everything. I've stopped billing people for everything. The interest was eating me alive. She still runs toward whoever is bleeding. Last month it was a neighbor's kidney stone, and Sunday dinner waited an hour. But the difference is, I no longer measure my worth by the weight. Brooke's still at the nursery. She got promoted to the perennials section, which she says is the right section for people learning to come back every year. The installments arrive on the 1st, hers to our parents, hers to me, round schoolgirl numbers shrinking 2 debts at once. And on my wall, between my diploma frame waiting for May and that photograph from our grandmother's yard, there's a brass magnet shaped like the scales of justice, holding up nothing anymore. Just hanging there, balanced. Some Saturdays, on my way out the door to coffee, I flick it level with one finger. For luck. I used to think forgiveness meant reopening the old door and pretending the frame was never cracked. Now I know it can be smaller and stronger than that. A new door, built to size, with one honest rule for a hinge, a lock that actually works, and the key in my own pocket, where it should have been all along. That's my story. One folder, carried for 3 years, 2 years of silence, and a doorbell I'm glad I answered, on my terms. If somebody in your family only sees you when you're breaking, I hope you build your own small door, and keep your own key. Share this with the one who holds everything together. Drop a comment telling me what you would have said on